Star Wars Unlimited has finally released, and we are seeing tons of players entering the game, including lots of new players who have a lot of questions about the general rules of the game. In fact, as I'm watching the various social media channels, Discord, Facebook, our YouTube comments, I'm seeing a lot of the same questions over and over again. So what I wanted to do was put out this video that is going to answer 7 of what I think are some of the most common rules questions in the game, and just attempt to help everybody out who is learning the game and coming up with some of these sort of quirky seeming scenarios for you. So in this video, that's exactly what we're going to do. Jump into all 7 of these rules questions, provide some examples, and answer exactly how these things work. So let's jump into it. What's up everyone, it's Dan with Main Deck, and like I said, we are back with another Star Wars Unlimited video. This time we're going over 7 of the most common rules questions I see from new players in the game. If you are an experienced Star Wars Unlimited player, you might find a nugget of wisdom in here, but this is likely stuff that you have learned pretty early on in the process. But if you are a new Star Wars Unlimited player, this is the perfect place for you to make sure you have a good understanding of how all of these interactions work, so you're reading cards correctly and playing the game correctly, because none of us want to accidentally cheat by playing the game wrong. So let's jump right into the first of our 7 rules issues that I see brought up commonly in our comments or in social media posts, and that is about abilities that allow you to perform attacks. So we're talking about cards like Rebel Assault here, or like Fleet Lieutenant. These are cards that allow you to perform an attack with a unit. And while these are pretty simple to understand, when you resolve the effect, you get to attack with a unit. The question that commonly gets asked is, does this allow me to attack with an exhausted unit? And the answer is no. Anytime an effect tells you to perform an attack, unless it tells you to perform it with an exhausted unit, then that unit must be ready in order to perform that attack, and then will exhaust as a part of performing that attack. So pretty straightforward. If an ability allows you to attack with 1 or more units, any units that you choose to attack with must be ready, and then you will exhaust them to perform those attacks. Now, the next one I see super commonly all the time, in fact, you wouldn't believe how many people I have seen post about how broken some of these cards seem to be when they don't completely understand the rule, is abilities that allow you to play other cards. So what I see most commonly is people looking at Energy Conversion Lab, the rare command base, and thinking that this allows you to play a unit with cost 6 or less for free. But the thing is, if an effect does not say for free or at some sort of reduced cost, like you see on Galactic Ambition, then you must pay the cost, even if it doesn't have that text written on there. Inherent in the rules of the game is when you play a card, you must pay the cost unless otherwise written. So on Energy Conversion Lab, in order to play that 6 or lower cost unit, you must still pay whatever its cost is. But when you use something like Sneak Attack, it will allow you to pay a lower cost as is written on the card instead of paying the normal cost. And as I mentioned, when you play something like Galactic Ambition, it is completely free. Now, one thing that catches people off guard a little bit is the hyperspace variants of some of these cards remove something that we call reminder text. Reminder text is this italicized parentheses text that is on some card text, but not all of it. That's really just extra text inherent to the rules of the text already written on the card. In other words, there are some basic game rules that sometimes some versions of the cards will sort of spell out for you, but then when you get these rare or hyperspace versions of cards, that text will actually be completely removed because it isn't necessary to have printed on the card when you understand the rules of the game. That is where a lot of this confusion comes from. Sometimes people looking at hyperspace versions of the cards where they do not have that reminder text written out on the card, and instead they just kind of make assumptions about the effect. Now, the next one was a super common question early on. It actually doesn't come up all that often in games, but it is important to know some of the intricacies of how this works, which is uniqueness. Cards representing named characters or things like unique weapons or unique ships are going to have a little star next to their name that indicates that they are unique. And what uniqueness means is that if you have a unique card in play and you attempt to play another copy of that exact same card, then you will have to choose to discard one of those 2 or defeat one of those 2 after it enters play. That is the exact rule as I have explained it, which means there are a couple things that you'll note from that. It must be the exact same card. So for example, with unique characters, we look at the subtitle underneath the card to determine if they're unique. That does mean you can have for example, leader Luke Skywalker, as well as the legendary unit Luke Skywalker in play at the same time, because both of them have different subtitles. They are different cards. But if you ever were to play a second legendary Luke Skywalker, well, you had one already in play, you would have to choose one of those to defeat. Now, this is something you can actually use to your advantage, because we have, for example, Luke Skywalker, who has a very powerful on-enter ability. And you may get into a situation where you want to play a second copy of a Luke Skywalker just to get that on-enter effect. And actually, it's very cute with Luke Skywalker, because you will resolve defeating one of those as soon as it enters play before you resolve Luke Skywalker's on-enter ability. And that then means that the on-enter ability will see that something was defeated, and it will get the full -6/-6, even if nothing else on your side was defeated that turn. So there are some cute ways that you can use this uniqueness rule to your advantage. Another great example is Admiral Mahdi, if you want to get his on defeat trigger. So make sure to keep those in mind, but mostly just watch out for how this uniqueness rule works, and make sure that you are not restricting yourself too much in what you can play or what you can have in play at once. Not everyone's a huge fan of this for thematic purposes, but honestly, it doesn't even come up all that often. And as the game grows, it'll be very useful, I think, to be able to not be totally restricted to only having that one version of Luke Skywalker in play at any one time. So I think it's very good for gameplay, and that is how uniqueness works. Now, here's one that comes up very commonly when the reminder text is removed on cards that are of a higher rarity, but that's, what do you do after you search part of your deck or your entire deck for a particular card? For example, when you play Darth Vader commanding the Legion, what happens to the other cards after you look at the top 10 to find those Imperial units? Well, what happens is anytime any part of your deck is searched, that part of your deck is then, after you're finished searching, randomized and then placed at the bottom of your deck. So whether that is the top 10 cards, like in Darth Vader commanding the Legion, or the top 5 cards with Recruit, or the entire deck with Search Your Feelings, you are going to shuffle whatever you searched and then put it at the bottom of your deck, or in the case of Search Your Feelings, just that is your deck. So you shuffle it and then replace it. That is inherent in the text in those cards. It is not always listed. It's just part of the basic core rules for searching any part of your deck in Star Wars Unlimited, and that's why you won't see it written out on certain higher rarity cards, because it's just generally a reminder text thing that doesn't have to be there, as long as you understand how the rules work. Now, here's an interesting little tidbit in the rules that applies to effects that allow you to place extra resources in play. Resources in Star Wars Unlimited inherently enter play exhausted. And that's not weird, actually. That's exactly the same as how all your units work. They all also inherently enter play exhausted. Same thing with resources. So when you play that resupply, that card enters exhausted. And when you play command and you choose the mode to put it into play as a resource, it also enters play exhausted. The reason people get confused about this is because, well, it's not written on the card to put it into play exhausted, but Super Laser Technician is a card that actually has explicit text that allows you to ready him after he enters as a resource. So some people get confused because they see Super Laser Technician in the starter deck, and then they just kind of think, well, yeah, resupply is going to work the same way, but that's not the case. Cards that are resources enter play exhausted unless an effect says otherwise, and that's just part of the rules of the game. And as a fun tidbit, that's also why in the regroup phase, we ready all of our resources at the end after we've played our new resource for the turn. Now, here's an interesting one that I've seen come up more and more often in the last few days. Is a base a unit? What people are usually asking is, can they use something like Overwhelming Barrage to send that damage at the opponent's base? And I have to correct everyone and make sure you've got this completely right, but a base is not a unit. A base does not count. Any effect that could deal damage to a unit cannot deal damage to a base. It must explicitly choose to deal damage to a base. A unit just refers to any unit card in play. It's an actual card type in this game, units. So we have our space units and our ground units, and it's just listed right on the card up at the top of it. But a base is not considered a unit, so those effects that target units, you just can't. You cannot target a base with it. It has to say a base. So just a quick, easy correction, but bases are not units. Finally, for the last rules clarification we're going to go through, we're going to look at a couple of rebels to show the distinction between on-attack effects and when this unit completes an attack effect. So these often people sort of lump into the same thing, and they resolve things in a fast way where they don't necessarily notice the distinction between these two effects. But on-attack effects, like you see on Sabine Wren, resolve before your combat damage is dealt, and they will happen no matter what happens to your unit in combat. On-attack effects simply happen, and then you resolve the damage from the attack, which is why cards like Boba Fett Disintegrator are so good. They get to resolve that on-attack effect right away, and sometimes that'll defeat the unit before it can even deal damage back to Boba. But these on-attack effects are very different than when this unit completes an attack, which is something you see on, for example, Zeb Orrelios. When this unit completes an attack, happens after the attack has completed, meaning that that unit must still be alive in order to resolve its when this unit completes an attack effect. So Zeb Orrelios, who is an excellent unit, does need to actually survive in order to then deal 4 more damage to another unit in the ground arena. Just like Ezra Bridger has to actually survive in order to scavenge and pilfer a card out of your deck. I mean, obviously, if he died in the fight, then he wouldn't be able to bring anything back to the Ghost in order to provide resources to the team. So it's thematically important that they survive, but it's also important in your gameplay because sometimes it's very easy for people to not notice. I've done this myself, actually. Not notice that, for example, Zeb won't get that effect if he ends up dying when he attacks something. So make sure you keep your Zebs and your Ezras safe, and make sure they survive the attack in order to resolve their when this completes an attack effect, because I find this one a very, very easy thing to forget in the heat of the moment when you are playing. So with that, those are the 7 rules that I've seen people asking questions about the most just on release of the game. But what I would love to know is, first of all, did this help you? Let me know in the comments below if I answered some rules questions that you had issues with. And are there any other rules questions that you have found confusing or commonly cropping up that I can go ahead and talk about in the comments, or maybe do another video or a short on or something? So let me know in the comments below if there are more rules questions that you think people are getting confused or that you personally have and you just don't understand. I would love to answer these questions for you. I have been playing a ton of Star Wars Unlimited since well before it released, and now with these physical cards in hand and getting to meet all the new people getting into the game and just exploring it for the first time, it's my absolute pleasure to be able to share some of this rules knowledge with people. So let me know in the comments below if you were helped by this video or if you have more questions for me, and I'd love to answer them. For now, that's going to do it for our Star Wars Limited video this week. I hope you guys found it helpful. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.